tier list. Now, I'm going to just do a little bit of housework before we get into it. Obviously, got to say thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. There is a reference link in the description below. And secondly, let's talk about why this tier list took a little longer to put out than usual. I like to do it either the day after or the morning, 2 days after. I wanted to spend a bit of extra time doing my research today. I put in a few hours doing some research on both stat websites, so like I think it's like wildstats.gg or something like that, stats websites, talking to some high-elo players, and also just kind of looking through some match histories and stuff like that. So I wanted to do my research for this particular tier list because there's a lot of new additions, a lot of big changes, and also there's quite a lot of like meme champions going around right now, which I'll talk about when we get there. Obviously, I didn't take pro and high-elo players and just put their opinions onto the tier list. This is my tier list. I wanted to kind of give it my opinion as well, which is why if you have someone that's like a challenger player, they might look at this tier list and think, well, that's not what I think, that's not right, because my tier lists are mostly calibrated for between emerald and diamond. If you're an emerald and diamond player and you're looking to get better, or you want to pick champions that are going to do well all the way through diamond and into master and challenger, these are what these tier lists are kind of calibrated for. If I like asked a Darkbreaker, for instance, to come and have a look at this Baron tier list, he might say, well, I don't agree with where this is, I don't think this is good, because he probably has a very different opinion about what he believes to be super strong in the Baron lane, which, you know, for him is completely right. So I've just changed my tier list based on my opinion for a slightly more wider elo range, realistically. So, first of all, Baron lane, Fiora. Fiora in the Baron lane, I still believe is the strongest. She hasn't been nerfed. Items haven't massively been changed. If anything, if you want to go down Bloodthirster route, her items have got better. She's got access to more items, which is nice. There are some crit Fiora builds which are genuinely working okay. So Fiora in general, I think, is in a good spot, and I think she remains the queen in the Baron lane. And because Gragas got nerfed in the last patch and he got hit a couple of different ways, it has meant that I think Gragas is no longer like absolute S+. But the reason that I said in the patch notes that Gragas would remain high tier is because Gragas is one of the safest blind pick Baron laners you can go for. If you pick, you know, Gragas and you've not seen who you're playing against in the Baron lane, there are very few matchups that are really hard for you. Fiora is one of the very few matchups that Gragas struggles with, and even then you can play super defensive, go Bramble Vest first, and just try not to, you know, try not to die, essentially. The other Baron laners that can work as a good blind pick are people like Garen and Malphite, and also Renekton, which is why all of them still remain strong picks in the Baron lane, because they're just good into a lot of matchups, and they also, if they're played well, can do really well for the team. Malphite's less of like a lane dominant Baron lane, but he's a really good team pick. Like Malphite, you can never go wrong picking Malphite for your team because his ultimate is just so useful. In terms of the rest of the spread, I think, you know, people like Darius, Riven, and Aurelia, they're all good. They're all strong, but they have some bad matchups into the tanks, and often can't, you know, if they don't get ahead from the early phase, can be difficult to get rolling. They're not like Akali or Katarina, who can just kind of exist in the laning phase and then find one opportunity and start blowing everybody up. You know, Aurelia and Riven take a little bit more, you know, lane presence, and also they're a little bit harder to pilot in those team fights. So they're like all strong A+. I've moved Wukong up because his sustain, I genuinely believe Wukong could be a sleeper OP Baron lane pick because of the sustain changes in the patch notes. But we'll have to see. AD Kennen, the reason Kennen is moved up is because I do think AD Kennen has got some legs. Now, what I would say is that I would not recommend playing full AD Kennen, and there is a reason that I would not recommend playing full AD Kennen, and the reason is, AD Kennen in PC is good because he has a very long laning phase and also is designed to have that split push pressure. In Wild Rift, split pushing is infinitely more difficult because of how quickly people move around the map. And B, lane bullies generally don't get to have the same kind of impact in Wild Rift. The reason being is that the honey fruit makes it very easy to out-sustain bad trades. And also, if you get back to lane so quickly in the early laning phase that actually lane bullies, the whole concept of a lane bully in Wild Rift kind of sucks because there is so many safety nets for people who take bad trades in lane that lane bullies just don't really have the same kind of impact. So therefore, playing full AD Kennen is not, in my opinion, recommended. However, something like a Hextech Gunblade as a first item for Kennen, then into maybe like a Rabadon's Death Cap and going to a full AP build, that could be a genuine way that you look to approach Kennen, especially with those Liandry's nerfs that happened relatively recently. So I think Kennen as a hybrid, or at least the first hybrid item in the form of Hextech Gunblade, could be a genuine option, and I think that does make him a pretty strong option in the Baron lane. Akali I have moved down. The reason being is her laning phase feels considerably worse, and she's also a lot worse versus the kind of beefier, more sustain heavy lanes now. So I think Akali in general is a little bit weaker in the Baron lane than she used to be. She already wasn't the best in Baron lane, I think, compared to her mid lane presence, but in general, you know, I think she just had a deserved hit here. I've moved Teemo up to B tier. I was kind of memeing on Baron lane. I think if you're going to pick Teemo anywhere, Baron lane is the best lane for Teemo to be in. He has got quite a lot of, as I said before, he's a lane dominant and he's a lane bully. The reason Teemo is good is he's a lane bully, right? So he's supposed to put you out of the laning phase very quickly. But like I said, there are a lot of safety nets in place to prevent those types of champions doing well. And so one of the reasons that Teemo isn't as strong in Wild Rift as he is maybe in the PC, and he's not particularly strong in PC, but he's more annoying in PC, is because if you have to go back because of poke in lane, it takes you a lot longer and you lose a lot more because of it in PC. Whereas in Wild Rift, you don't actually lose that much for backing. You might lose maybe 200 gold here or there, and you might lose like 2 or 3 minions at max, you know, max if you're really unlucky. So in general, lane bullies don't do as well in Wild Rift, and that's why Teemo himself, you know, the whole concept of Teemo is a lane bully, and so therefore, when Wild Rift kind of invalidates your identity by the kind of the safety nets they provide for other players, that's where these types of champions don't do so well. Okay, yeah, other than that, I think everything you recognize it is pretty normal. I put Thresh there because people genuinely try and play Thresh top, and I just don't think he's very good, but alas, let's move on. Ooh, you've got to move down a little bit here. Right, so this is the jungle tier list. I don't think much has changed. Despite the nerfs to Kha'Zix and Xin Zhao, I don't really think they've changed, and Lee Sin still remains on level with them, so you'll notice that not much has shifted for this tier list in a huge amount. I think Rengar, I underrate him a little bit. I do think Rengar, especially with the critical strike item changes, is actually pretty strong. I really like Wukong. I know he's not as good in solo queue as he is in competitive, but I still think I feel bad putting him on the same tier as someone like Riven or Evelynn, so I'm sticking with Wukong where he is. Evelynn, the reason Evelynn has moved back up a little bit again, and this is, I talked to Doom about this. Doom puts her in S tier, and by the way, I'm the Doom is the jungler for the old Tribe EU, now No Team No Talent, the #1 team in Europe. So he probably is, as you can imagine, the #1 jungler in Europe. He puts Evelynn high because she's the only, or one of the only viable AP junglers that we have in the meta right now, because Fizz isn't very good, and Amumu sucks, and Diana sucks. So there aren't many good AP junglers, and so therefore, you know, Evelynn, by virtue of that, is just a good AP option, and so therefore needs to be relatively high because she's the best of the bad, basically. And most AP junglers are pretty bad right now, which is a bit of a shame. We need some more AP junglers. Okay, so Riven. I've seen some good Riven jungler players recently, which is why I've moved her up. Graves, Pantheon. Now, I looked at Hell's tier list, and I've also looked at some other people's tier lists. They really, really hate Olaf. And I'm trying to wonder why. I think Olaf is okay. I genuinely think Olaf is pretty solid. Like, I think, you know, especially with the fact that we're in an enchanter meta where a lot of supports are playing enchanters. We know that Lulu is a really common pick. Olaf is really strong. And I just don't understand why people rate him so badly. Maybe I'm just a bit of an Olaf fan. I think Olaf is one of those junglers that can massively carry a game. But that's just my personal opinion. I think Olaf is solid, and I think we do him dirty by putting him lower down tier lists. In terms of Master Yi, you're probably wondering where Master Yi's ended up. Probably on the same par as Tryndamere, which is just like a solid A-tier jungler. Again, the nerfs to him and the nerfs to the items have meant that he's still good, better than he used to be, still way better than he used to be, but he's no longer like ridiculous, which is, I think, a fine place for Master Yi to be in. I think he'll still do incredibly well at low elo. I also rate Jarvan higher than some of the other players. The reason I rate Jarvan highly is that maybe he's not so good at carrying games, but for your average jungle player, Jarvan is like easy to play. He doesn't get very low in the jungle. He's got a really, really dependable gank. His level 5 is really strong for ganking and also in team fights. I just think he's like a solid, serviceable jungler, which is why he's an A tier. The same as Vi, if I'm completely honest with you. They're both just solid, serviceable junglers. Rammus, I actually have boosted his position a little bit, or have I? I don't know. I think Rammus is okay. I think he was really good when Yi was kind of broken, because Rammus is one of the best answers into Master Yi. And I think he like hovers just below Yi. Like if Yi gets picked, either you're going to pick a really aggressive jungler, or if you're not confident on a really aggressive jungler, pick something like Rammus, because Rammus is a great answer into Master Yi. Okay, Teemo, don't play him jungle. A lot of the AP junglers, by the way, aren't very good right now, like a Mumu, Mundo, and Diana, which is why they're pretty low down. Fizz is slightly better than them, but these guys are just in a bit of a rough spot right now, and the Liandry's nerf really hurt Amumu, honestly. That was one of his best AP items, and so that obviously hurts Amumu, you know, unintentionally. Okay, let's have a look at the mid lane now. Mid lane I found quite hard to do. I called in the help of Snitch, the old tribe EU, now no team, no talent mid laner. And he gave me, you know, this piece of advice, which I think was pretty apt. In general, Luden's users, so Luden's Echo users, have got better. And the biggest Luden's Echo user is Ziggs. And that, for me, puts Ziggs firmly in the best mid lane spot right now. I think, you know, Ziggs didn't get nerfed, and one of his core items got buffed pretty significantly. And so, therefore, I think Ziggs is just a super strong mid laner. And with the Akali nerfs, I think that she's no longer absolutely S+. I think she struggles more heavily into ranged matchups now. However, and having talked to a few players about Akali, the laning, it's the same as Katarina. The reason Katarina is still an S despite the nerfs is the same reason that Akali stays still pretty high up despite the nerfs. It doesn't matter about the laning phase so much when it comes to these champions. Yes, okay, Akali used to be much better than Katarina in the laning phase, that's for certain. But both of these champions are not particularly concerned with the laning phase, especially in mid. These champions are farming to get to level 5 whilst not dying for the most part, especially into ranged matchups. These champions become better and come online when team fights start to happen, and Akali and Katarina both prey on incredibly like chaotic team fights. All it takes is one good team fight for a Katarina and Akali, and suddenly they are in the game one-shotting AD carries all the time. So that's why these champions remain good, because A, their kits fit this chaotic style of play that wildrift has, and B, it doesn't matter about the laning phase. In fact, I could make the argument that the laning phase is not important for practically any champion, because the laning phase in this game is so unbelievably short, and there are so many, as I said, safety nets for having a bad laning phase, that the laning phase isn't exactly hugely important, and it's more about what they provide for a team and how strong they are with the current crop of items and kind of how they scale. And Akali and Katarina, they can ignore the laning phase. Yes, okay, if you have a bad Katarina or a bad Akali, they'll die in the laning phase. But for the most part, you can ignore the laning phase. And also, it's incredibly hard to freeze wave in mid lane, so punishing someone for wave mismanagement in mid is much harder than, say, in the Baron lane, for instance. Other than that, Corki, super good still. Lucian still solid. Zed with Seralda's Grudge, insanely good. I like Orianna. In fact, if you go for the Luden's Echo Orianna, which I don't mind, I think, you know, she's in a pretty strong spot still. I've moved Irelia down a little bit, just because I think Irelia is very hard to play properly. And I think by putting her in S, I'm giving people the wrong impression that she's this champion that can absolutely just pop off. I would say she's almost arguably harder to play than a Katarina and a Kali as well. You know, I think Irelia takes a lot more precision and a practice to get right. Yasuo's strong. I think Ahri's really solid right now, especially with the Luden's changes. I think Twisted Fate's still really good. I think even though Seraphine is a big Luden's user, I think she's much better in competitive than she is in solo queue, and so I think she stays in A. Other than that, Annie is a good Luden's user, so she's still in a good spot, as is Fizz, also in a good spot. I still think, unfortunately, Kennen is not that strong in mid, but yeah, no major changes here. I've moved Lux up slightly for the main reason that she's a Luden's user. She's a big Luden's Echo user, so therefore gets some value out of it, and so therefore I've moved Lux up ever so slightly as well. Okay, AD carries. Right, there's some... Okay, first of all, I think I've included everyone this time. I missed out a couple of AD carries last time. Second of all, it's still Ezreal Kai'Sa. There hasn't really been many changes to the AD carry meta. I have moved Varus up. I have not put Varus in S+ tier. Most competitive AD carries will tell you that Varus is the most busted AD carry in the game, and I don't disagree with them in competitive. I think in solo queue, protection for Varus and also in general, the kind of champions that you tend to see in solo queue. Varus is very weak to assassins. Ezreal and Kai'Sa can negotiate assassins better because they have an invisibility and a jump, as can Xayah with her ultimate, as can Corki with his Valkyrie, as even can Lucian with his dash. But Varus is a very immobile, no movement type AD carry, and that makes him vulnerable to assassins. And if an assassin gets fed in solo queue, doesn't matter how fed you are on Varus, you're probably going to die. So in competitive, I'd say that Varus is absolutely the best AD carry in the meta. But in solo queue, you need to be aware that he is not, he still has the same vulnerabilities as every other low mobility AD carry. I've put Jinx in. I put her an A+. I don't think she's S. I think she's S+ with Lulu, but I think she's A+ by herself. Vayne and Draven in A+ for the same reason. They are still super strong. Vayne is really strong. The reason Vayne is not higher is because A, she works best with Lulu, and B, I think you need to be a really good Vayne player to make her feel as good as the other champions. I play with a guy called Joey Skaggs, absolutely insane Vayne player. He makes her look giga busted every time he plays her, but when I've played with random Vaynes in solo queue, they look garbage. I put Ziggs in A+, because I genuinely believe now that Ziggs is a really strong bot laner as well, especially with the Ludens changes. So Ziggs can be played bot or mid. He's such a lane bully, very difficult to punish. I really like Ziggs in the bot lane now. You might be wondering, where is Nasus AD carry? I know that Hells, I can't work out if he's memeing or not. And I know that he likes to play Nasus Senna, but for the reason that I've stated with like Jinx, for instance, I'm not going to put Nasus in here because he needs to be played with Senna. He's more of an addition to fasting Senna than he is as a good bot laner by himself. Secondly, I actually don't think he's that good. I don't think he's busted. I think he's good in competitive with Senna, only with Senna. And outside of Senna, you're equivalent to running it down if you're trying to play Nasus in the AD carry position. However, with Senna, he's just as good as Galio, or just as good as other. I actually don't even think Nasus is better than Galio in the fasting center position. I think he's okay, but I don't really understand the value that you get out of Nasus over someone like Galio, who can get that gold and also have a huge amount of CC for team fights. You know, Nasus can wither one person, otherwise he's really easy to kite. I don't rate Nasus in the bot lane. I don't think he's good. I think he's a solid choice with Senna, but only Senna. In terms of other major picks here of Ashe, there's a whole load of AD carries in A tier because these are all just like okay AD carries. I think Senna is decent. I much prefer fasting Senna or support Senna than I do AD carry Senna, but I know that some people do really like AD carry Senna. AD Kennen, do I think he's good? Absolutely not. For the same reasons that I mentioned in the Baron lane. The problem with AD Kennen is that all of his abilities are built, apart from his second ability, all of his abilities are built to be AP. And so therefore, if you play AD Kennen, you're basically playing a shit AD carry with some abilities that will just do nothing to your opponents apart from stun them for 0.25 seconds, which is negligible. So I think that AD carry Kennen, there is no reason to pick AD carry Kennen over one of the other good AD carries at all, even more so than the ones that are in A tier right now. AD carry Kennen is bad. And it has been bad in PC. There is Reckless played it for Fnatic in the LEC like a couple of times, but it was like a niche pick that fit a composition or was into a certain matchup. AD carry Kennen as a pick, as a random pick, it's not good, and it won't be good. The AD changes were primarily made to help his Baron lane, and his AD carry position, I don't think he's going to be good enough. He's got Peel, he's got Electrical Surge to get him out, which is fine. But other than that, I wouldn't see why you'd ever pick him over one of the other really good AD carries that are on this list. There we go. All right, supports. There isn't actually a huge amount to talk about in changes with supports. It's still, in my opinion, the Janna Lulu meta again. Like, they haven't nerfed many of the enchanter items. I think Nami's just a little bit below Janna Lulu, but still really strong, and I think Braum is still a great pick. I don't think the changes have suddenly made Thresh OP. I think the changes have made Thresh really serviceable, but the problem with Thresh will always be the same thing, that you're reliant on hitting your hook especially to punish enchanters. You're still going to lose heavily into enchanters. You don't do very well against Braum, so therefore, like, he's not as good as the current crop of good enchanters, and he's not as good as Braum, but he's decent, and I would say he's probably the 5th best support that we have right now. Rakan, don't think it's made him S+ tier or S tier. I think they've just made him good, and I like playing Rakan, but again, I still think he's one of those picks that will be better with Xayah overall. especially because you get the attack speed from your Grand when Xayah uses her second ability as well. But I still think, you know, Rakan is still a really good support. Senna fasting, obviously, you know, Senna support. I think Senna's better when played with a fasting, but fasting AD carry with like the Nasus or the Galio. But that's usually better in competitive. But Senna is still very serviceable as a random support. The only problem with Senna, and this is something that Snitch told me about, and I completely agree with him. The only problem with Senna is that if you pick Senna in solo queue and then your AD carry picks a normal AD carry, you've suddenly got 2 ranged, and it kind of messes up your team comps. So you might not have a tank, or you might not have a proper support that kind of does a lot in team fights like CC or buffing, and so you end up just having 2 AD carries, which kind of messes up your team composition a little bit, which is one of the problems that I think Senna has, and why she's better when placed with someone like a Galio or a Nasus, and then they farm and then she takes the souls, because that means that at least then you do have a melee or a tank that you can keep your composition balanced, and that's one of the problems. Yeah, that's about everything. I meant to put Teemo in fact, anything that I'm going to remove Ziggs, because I don't like Ziggs as a support. Ziggs is okay as a support, but yeah, that is the rest of the comps. I think like Sona and Seraphine are all pretty solid. I think Lux is good, Soraka's okay, she's not A+ anymore because she got nerfed. No major changes to the support list though. But yeah, that is everything for my tier list for patch 2.4b. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.